Alright, Buddy here from Backroad Buddy's Red Tail Lodge, and the video we want to share with you today is the tips and tricks we learned from Season 2 in 2020. Now, Season 2 wasn't really what we originally imagined, and we mainly traveled around Colorado and a little bit of Utah. But we did learn quite a few things along the way, so we wanted to share them with you in hopes that they'll help you out. Maybe you can take away at least one little nugget or two. And that you don't make the either mistakes we've made, or you can learn from our experience. So sit back, relax, and enjoy Tips and Tricks, Season 2. Lesson 1. Bring your own squeegee. We found that some of the gas stations just didn't have the best squeegees, and having our own really helped us clean the really large windshield that we have, and also enabled us to clean our windshield when we were leaving a campground, so we had a better chance of getting photos or videos out the windshield without big bug splats in the way. Lesson 2. Use the step in the front bumper to reach the windshield easier. This took us over a year to discover that this was even here, so hopefully you won't have to wait that long, because it sure makes it a lot easier to reach that windshield when you use that bumper step up. Lesson 3. Leave the Lagun leg and arm in place. Since we changed where we mount the Lagun table, in Season 1 we actually mounted it in the floor of the van, so we actually had to take it all the way up and down every time we wanted to use it. But because we have it mounted on the side of our electrical cabinet here, it's easy to swing it out of the way and just leave it in place all the time. We just have to get the tabletop in and out. Lesson 4. Bend the hooks on the table leaf supports so they don't poke through the cover. Now, I had made a nice cover this Season 2 to cover up the tabletop for a Lagun table, and these extensions are used when we fold the table out to full length, but on the ends they were kind of like a hook, and the cheap material of the cover just didn't hold up, and those hooks were poking through. So we were actually in State Forest State Park at the time, and it was raining, so we were stuck inside anyway. So Left Buddy just pulled out his pliers and bent the hooks over and solved the issue. Lesson 5. Shorten the bungee cord hooks that hold the tabletop leaves closed. Now, as you see here, we used a bungee cord to hold the table leaves folded up so they wouldn't flop open when we go to store it. And they hook into these holes on the other side in the table mount, but it was really hard to get those hooks in and out, and we were doing it so much that we just clipped off a little bit of the hook, so it just made it easier to get in and out of those holes. Lesson 6. Leave the bungee cord off the tabletop. This kind of makes Lesson 5 obsolete. Because we now have a cover to go on top of it, there was actually no reason to have the bungee cords on there to hold it closed, which is kind of why I couldn't show you the hooks that were cut off, because we no longer have that bungee cord. So putting it in the cover and closing it up keeps the tabletop leaves from opening up when we go to store it. So there was actually no reason to use that bungee cord anymore. Lesson 7. Leave the tabletop on the Lagun base overnight. So this kind of went along with, we realized we don't need to be taking this up and down quite so much anymore. And if we just leave it on the Lagun base, we could actually push it back over the bench seat there, and we could throw our computer bags and jackets underneath. And as you see, I put my 2 suitcases, one on top of the table, one on top of the fridge there, and there was no need to take that tabletop down every night. So it kind of saved a lot of hassle. Lesson 8. Loosen the large mounting nut under the front passenger seat so the seat spins easier. When we initially got our van, the passenger seat swivels around to face the back, and it was always so hard and stiff, and we thought, well, it'll loosen up with time. Well, it never did. So Left Buddy actually tried to go in and investigate, and this is the large mounting nut underneath there, and he just loosened that up a little bit, and it's been working like a charm ever since. So if you have an issue with that, you might want to look into giving that a try. Lesson 9. Install a remote power switch for the water heater. So our water heater doesn't have a power switch to turn it off. You actually have to unplug it. And it's also located in the back of the van. And of course, when we really want to turn the water heater on and off, we're normally up in the front of the van. And we would like to be able to turn it on and off so that we can manage our battery power better. So we have a tendency to turn it on when we're driving down the road because we know the batteries will be recharging at that time. Or if we just heat it up right before we need to do dishes, or we know we need hot water usage, and then just turn it off and don't let the water heater run constantly. So that kind of saves on our battery usage. Now you'll see the one part actually plugs. So you take the water heater and it plugs into that one piece, and then the remote we actually mounted underneath the kitchen sink there in the van, so we can turn it on and off when we want to. The big drawback is there isn't a light to actually tell you whether it's on or off, but you just, if you're not sure, you just push the button again, and then you'll know it's in the state that you just pushed. Lesson 10. Install BF Goodrich KO2 tires. When we originally bought our van, we bought them with the factory tires to save money. And after traveling almost 2 seasons on them, including one winter, we decided it was time to spend a little bit more money and get a more aggressive tread. We live in Colorado, so we get quite a bit of snow, and we didn't really feel comfortable driving the van, especially up in the mountains, on the factory tires. So we wanted something with a little more tread. These actually do really well, and they also give us a little bit more lift, so about 1 inch more lift, which also helps when we're going out on dirt roads, when we're camping. And we try to stay on 2-wheel drive roads, but even then sometimes it's nice to have a little extra lift and a little more aggressive tread. So we felt that was really well worth the money. The one drawback with the larger tires is that Ford doesn't provide a way of adjusting the speedometer or odometer for the larger tire size. So we have to keep that in mind when we're driving down the road, because we're going about 10% faster than what the speedometer says we are. Lesson 11. Install window film to reduce heat gain through the front windows. Now, when we're parked, we can use our window shades to keep down the heat gain through the front windows, but that doesn't work when we're driving down the road. And we were noticing quite a bit of heat gain when the sun's beating in on you, and it can really get quite uncomfortable. So we installed this window film, and we put it on both the driver and passenger windows, door windows, and then we did an eyebrow across the front windshield, and that really seemed to help out a lot. We actually ordered the film and installed it ourselves. We had trouble finding someone who would install it for us, but so don't look at the installation very closely, because there are a couple little mistakes there, but it seems to do the job, so it makes us happy. Lesson 12. Don't use the power awning unless both of us are there. We learned this the hard way. We had a couple wind incidents Our Carefree power awning can't really take much wind, and we don't put it out unless we're there, but there was one time where I went for a walk and Left Buddy was there by himself, and this actual dust devil came along, and he had to like quickly grab the awning to keep it from being ripped off the van. And there was another time where the wind just seemed to kick up really suddenly, and we didn't notice it at the time, but it wasn't long after that second wind incident that we actually went to go use it again and noticed that the awning had pulled out of one of the brackets, and we kind of had to struggle getting straps and stuff to strap it back onto the rack there to make sure it didn't fall off on driving around until we could get back home and fix it properly. And it turned out that two of the brackets were actually damaged. The screws were missing totally out of the one bracket and one out of the other one, and we actually ended up drilling some new holes and attaching that with some more screws. So that was really could have been much more damage had that awning fallen off while we were driving down the road. So we really are careful about when we use that power awning now. Lesson 13, buy a collapsible ladder. When we had that incident with the power awning and we're trying to strap it up to the roof rack, we did not have a ladder with us, and it was really a struggle to try to reach that and get that strapped down without a ladder. So the first thing we did when we got back was buy a collapsible ladder, and it doesn't really take up that much space, and it really comes in handy. And we've actually used it to push the snow off the solar panels, and just makes it easier to reach the roof. Lesson 14, bring along a moonshade. So even though we have a power awning, we also have a moonshade with us now, and it really comes in handy. There are times when even if it wasn't windy and we could use the power awning, the sun may be coming from a different angle depending how our campsite is, and we really want the awning on the other side of the van, on the driver's side. So the moonshade is actually a pretty popular shade. It just you can attach it to your van with these large magnet hooks, and it really works somewhat like a tent. So you've got poles and you anchor the one side to your vehicle, and then there's poles that you stake down on the other side. So it takes a little bit more time to put up, but it does much better in the wind than the power awning. So we really like having it along. Lesson 15, add eyebolts to the roof rack to hook the moonshade into. So those magnet hooks are pretty strong and they do pretty well, but especially here in Colorado we can get some pretty strong winds, and we've had those magnets pull off the vehicle. And so we actually attached some eyebolts to our roof rack, and there's carabiners on the corners of the moonshade, and you can easily hook them into the hooks on the roof rack. And it comes with the moonshade. The carabiners have a little pull string, so it makes it easy to attach it high above your head while you're standing on the ground. So it was really a nice little feature on there, and we really have put that to use. Lesson 16, use electrical tape to attach the power cord of the DC fan to its metal frame. So we use a couple of these DC fans hanging above our bed to help with the ventilation, and the power cord connection to the back, you could see with the red tape that it pulls out a lot, and Left Buddy's fixed them several times. And so we discovered that if you attach the power cord to that metal frame with electrical tape, then that reduces the tension on that connection into the fan, and so then we don't have to keep repairing those wires. So Left Buddy's much happier now. Lesson 17, use vents in the front door windows to increase fresh airflow. Now these window vents that we bought for season 2, we love them. We use them all the time. It's great to be able to secure the van, so even if we're just parked and we go off on a hike or something, we can put those vents in. It allows airflow to come through, but still leaves the van secure because the windows are rolled up and it's harder to break in than if you would leave the windows down. And so we really love those. It helps with not only the airflow, but also helps with humidity control inside the van. Usually if you seal it up and don't get good fresh airflow, especially overnight on a cold night, you'll get condensation on the inside. So we've never had condensation with these window vents in, so we really love it. Lesson 18, add a plastic guard at the top of the shelf to keep things from rolling or sliding off. We keep a couple of the stadium seats there on that top shelf, and our laundry hamper is right below there, and they kept rolling off and into our clothes hamper all the time. So we got annoyed enough. We had a spare piece of plastic that Left Buddy fashioned to hook into the T-track there and keep those in place and keep them from falling off. Now we could have used bungees or something, but we had that spare plastic laying around and it works out pretty well. The bungees might have gotten in the way of reaching back in there to grab things, so just that little lip on the edge of the shelf just seems to do the trick. Lesson 19, don't use grommets on towels or washcloths. Now this was a previous tip that we actually gave you to use grommets, and we've used them on our curtains and the tie backs on our curtains, and they've worked out really well. However, the hand towel and our washcloths that we use that we normally hang from the T-track using carabiners, it's a looser weave of a material and the grommets just pulled out. So right now we're just using them with the holes and without the grommets, but probably in the future we'll use something else like towels with little hooks or just a little strip of material loop on the end so we can hook into. But we'll see how long these last with the holes. Lesson 20. Getting things to stick to the plastic molding inside the van is a struggle. So this isn't as much of a tip because we really don't have a real good solution. We struggle because what we like to do is we have our curtain that divides from the front cab to the back, and we like to pull those, and then we have tie backs that we use command hooks on each side. And we've tried several things. Initially we couldn't even get the command hooks to stick, so we replaced the adhesive that comes with the command hooks with 3M Scotch Extreme mounting tape, and that worked for a while, but they, especially when you get sitting in the hot sun or whatever, they eventually fell off. And so then we replaced them with we replaced it with 3M Scotch VHB tape, and that seemed to work better. And so we were able to go several months before the hooks finally fell off. And so the last time we reapplied the command hooks, we actually still used the VHB tape, but we scuffed up the surface a little bit with a Scotch-Brite scour pad and cleaned it with rubbing alcohol before putting the VHB tape on there. So we'll see how long that lasts, but that's still an ongoing struggle. Lesson 21, struggling with keeping window shades in. So this is another one where we're still trying to work out a solution. I originally made the window shades and they're a friction fit in all the windows. However, some of them didn't stay in quite as well as others, and especially over time as things kind of wore a little bit and got looser. So we did try this season to use some Velcro in some of them. We actually tried attaching some little magnets do the ones that go in the front doors. And nothing really seemed to last very long. Now there are better Velcros out there with stronger adhesive, but we didn't try that. And the main reason was the window shades we've used for 2 whole seasons now, and they're starting to see a little wear and tear and starting to fall apart. So we actually made the decision to buy professionally made window curtains. So we'll actually present that in a future video. Lesson 22. The 28-liter fridge is a little too small for our needs. Now, the small fridge didn't bother us so much during season 1, but it became a little more frustrating during season 2. Because of COVID, we were trying to go longer between resupplying, and we weren't. In season 1, we were stopping at truck stops and fast food restaurants to buy cold drinks, but we weren't doing that during COVID. So I actually like to drink iced tea over Coke, but we didn't have a way to keep iced tea cold, so I was mainly drinking Cokes, and we could only fit 1 Coke each, so 2 Cokes total in the fridge at a time, and that was our only real cold drink because we had no ice. And so I think you'll see in season 3 we're going to upgrade to a larger fridge. In addition to the size, it's a top-loading fridge, so it really kind of got to be a pain after a while because inevitably what you want's on the bottom, so you practically have to pull everything out of the fridge to get to what you want. So that was getting a little old. So stay tuned for more info on what we switched to for season 3. Lesson 23. Some vegetables do not keep very long when not refrigerated. So we learned this lesson with broccoli. Since we didn't have as much room in the fridge and we were trying to go longer between resupplies, we were actually trying to push it on keeping fresh vegetables out of the refrigerator. And the broccoli started noticeably giving off an odor in less than a week. We were still able to cook it and it seemed fine to eat, but it was another reason why you'll see a new fridge come season 3 so we can keep some more fresh vegetables in the refrigerator to have them last longer. Lesson 24. A 38-gallon HDX tote holds all our kayak gear nicely. So yes, we now have a 3-person inflatable kayak, a Sea Eagle 370 Pro, and we got it in August, and we were a little concerned about how we would fit it into our van, but we found that 38-gallon tote and it turned out to be the perfect size. We were able to get the kayak, the seats, the paddles, our life jackets, all inside that tote, and the tote is just a slightly shorter than the gear slide is wide, so it fits right behind our drawer units and water jugs that we have. So it fits in on that gear slide really nicely and holds everything in there. So that really turned out to be a big win. Lesson 25. The Camco Leveling Blocks are not very durable. We initially had the Camco Leveling Blocks. They're inexpensive, they're easy to use, they don't weigh much, and they fit together like Legos. And I don't have a very good picture of them here, but they're the yellow Lego looking blocks. And we got partway through a second season with them, but they were cracking and falling apart, so we've actually replaced them with beach lane camper levelers. So they're more expensive, they are heavier, but they seem like they're gonna last a lot longer. You kind of use them a little differently. You kind of ride up on them. They aren't like Legos, as you can see in the picture. So hopefully they'll work out well, and we'll let you know how we like them in the future. Lesson 26. Use a metal reducer instead of a plastic reducer when installing an Espar heater. Now I won't get into all the details of installing an Espar heater. We have another video on that, and I'll put a link in the description below. But we installed it for this season, and it was working fine until about September, and it stopped working. The heat wouldn't kick on, and so it actually took us a while to figure out what the issue was. And we, tried quite a few different experiments, and we came to the conclusion that the issue was between the fuel pump and where it connects into the gas tank. And unfortunately, that meant we had to drop the gas tank again to get to it. And it turned out there's a little plug that comes off of the port, I guess it's called a port connector, that comes off the top of the gas tank. And then you need a reducer because it's a larger diameter than the actual fuel line that goes into the fuel pump for the Espar heater. And we initially installed it with a plastic one, and it broke right in two, and that was our issue. So they do make metal ones, so we replaced it with a metal one. We secured the line a little better because we think it just, vibrated and broke. So yeah, if you are going to install an Espar heater yourself, use a metal one to start out with, and you shouldn't have an issue like we did. Lesson 27, periodically tighten all the bolts and stop block on the gear slide. This was actually something that came up in the Van Do It Owners Facebook group. And so we removed the gear slide, and when we checked underneath, sure enough, some of those bolts had come loose over time. So we tightened those back up, and we're going to add this to our yearly maintenance list to make sure we go in and check those, because you don't want those to come out, because that could be a safety issue eventually. Lesson 28. The gear slide was sticking due to a large nut on the underside catching on the metal strips across the van floor. So this is what we discovered when we pulled the gear slide out. We knew we had kind of a little issue that sometimes when we pulled the gear slide out, it would seem to catch. And our workaround is slightly lifting the gear slide up to get over what was ever catching. Well, we discovered what was catching. And this is another one we haven't really fixed yet. So we're looking at a couple ideas. There's a large nut on the underside of the gear slide, and it was scraping those metal strips that run across the floor of the van. And so we probably need to find a nut that has the same interior diameter but is just slightly smaller in diameter on the outside. And I think it has to do with the two bolts, the way they tighten up. They don't quite line up, so the flat side's down. One's got a little point sticking down. Now we probably could file that point down a little bit, but that might get into an issue of being unable to tighten or loosen that bolt, or nut, I mean. So we'll see how that goes and see if we can get a fix to that, because lifting the gear slide up isn't always an option when you got a lot of weight on there. Lesson 29. Flip the rug over when taking off wet, muddy, snowy gear inside the van. So we kind of discovered this as we started camping in some bad weather like snow and mud and stuff. So we do have this little rug that's right by the sliding door, and on the back side it's rubber. So it occurred to us one day, especially when it's really cold or it's raining outside and you don't want to stand outside and take off all your gear while you're standing there, or have the sliding door open while you're doing that. So we just flip that rug over, we come in, we close the door, and then we can take off all our gear in the nice, warm, dry interior of the van, but all our dripping of moisture and snow and mud is on the rubber side of the mat. And then once we get all that gear off, and we'll put our shoes like either in that door well, or we'll put it, we also have a plastic shoe bin underneath the bench seat. We put dirty, icky footwear in. And probably hang our jackets on the back of the front seats to dry off. And then once we have our shoes or boots off, then we can flip the rug back over, and now we have a nice, dry, warm rug to walk on instead of having all that mud or dirt or snow or water on the floor to walk around in your stocking feet. So that kind of worked out really well. Lesson 30. Modify the clothes hamper holder to allow the electrical cabinet to open. So for season 2, we built this wooden holder to keep our clothes hamper from sliding off the gear slide when we move it in and out. And it's bolted into the gear slide, and the lip of it was preventing us from opening the door to the back of our electrical cabinet. Now, to be fair, we don't get in there a whole lot, but that is where our circuit breakers are. That is where some of our fuses are. And if we have to get to it, especially if we've got a fully loaded van, pulling out the clothes hamper is one thing, but then having to work your way back in there and unbolt this holder off the gear slide just to be able to get into that cabinet seemed like a little much. So Left Buddy actually cut down the sides of it around one of the corners, and he actually switched the door so it opens the other direction. So now it can open with that holder in place. Lesson 31, carry spare fuses for the van. So we originally had an issue getting our van to start, and luckily we carry a whole assortment of fuses for our van, and we were able to replace one of the fuses in the fuse box under the hood and get the van to start again. And that took a little Googling to figure out which fuse to replace, and that was not the root cause of the issue, but at least it got us going again for a couple days anyway, until we had another issue again. But having spare fuses can get you out of a bind and doesn't leave you stranded somewhere remote. Now there's quite a few fuses in the van, so we have a fuse box underneath the hood. There's the fuses inside our electrical cabinet that Van Duit installed when they installed additional electrical work in our van. And then there's also 1 or 2 fuse boxes underneath the steering wheel on the driver's side. You actually have to remove a panel to get to them. And so our advice is check your owner's manual and make sure you know where they are and what all different types of fuses you need. We would recommend carrying at least one of every type that you have in your van. And then also, if you've done any RV modifications and added additional fuses than what came with the vehicle, make sure you know where those are and what type of fuses those take as well. Lesson 32. If the starter motor doesn't crank, try again in neutral gear. So this was actually a trick that the tow truck driver taught us. So that time I was telling you we were having trouble starting the van, well, a couple days later it happened again. The fuse this time did not fix it, so we actually called AAA, had a tow truck come. But the tow truck driver came and it didn't start when it was in park, and he switched it into neutral and it started right up. So it saved us a tow, and that also allowed us to get over to a relative's house, pick up a spare vehicle before driving our van over to the Ford dealer and finding out what the real issue is. And it turned out they replaced the starter motor. But knowing that little trick of trying to start it in neutral may get you out of a bind somewhere so you aren't stranded. I guess apparently the Ford Transit van has a switch in there that won't let you start the engine unless you are in park or neutral, but sometimes it fails and doesn't really detect what gear you're in. So if it doesn't start in park, then try neutral and it may start up for you. Thanks for watching. If you want a little more detail, then you can look in the description below. We have a link to our related blog post, so check that out. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. We'd really appreciate that. Ta-ta for now.